in the heart of Burbank, California. A conversation was about to spiral into something no one anticipated. What started as casual banter under studio lights would evolve into a confrontation between two philosophies of strength, two generations of cinema, and two very different understandings of what it meant to be authentic. Thomas Cruise, Mapother IV, had built an empire on fearlessness. For nearly 40 years, his name had been synonymous with death-defying cinema. He'd hung from planes, scaled skyscrapers, and performed stunts that insurance companies called impossible. Every interview reinforced the same narrative. Tom Cruise was the real deal. The actor who refused stunt doubles, who turned performance into reality through sheer willpower. When he sat down across from Stephen Colbert on that autumn evening, the audience was primed for the usual stories of daring and determination. What they got instead would become viral gold and personal reckoning. So, the motorcycle sequence in Dead Reckoning, Stephen began, leaning forward with practiced enthusiasm. "You actually rode off that cliff yourself?" Tom's smile was automatic, perfected through decades of promoting films. Every frame. Broke my foot on the landing. But that's what separates cinema from fantasy. I don't fake it. The audience erupted. Tom absorbed their energy like oxygen. That familiar validation he'd chased across continents and through impossible stunts. "You know," Stephen continued, his tone shifting to conspiratorial, "there's been this debate online about authenticity in action cinema. Old school versus new school. People arguing about who really walks the walk. The game's evolved." Tom replied, confidence rising. "The old guard had their moment. But modern action demands more. We've moved beyond the days of theatrical punches and staged confrontations." "Even someone like Clint Eastwood?" Stephen asked. Eyebrows raised. The name hung in the studio air like a challenge. Tom felt something flicker inside him. Respect. Certainly. But quickly overwhelmed by the heat of the moment and decades of being Hollywood's most audacious performer. "Clint's a legend." "Obviously," Tom said, diplomatic instinct kicking in. Then something shifted. "But honestly, I'd go toe-to-toe with Clint any day. My training's evolved past anything that generation experienced." The audience gasped. Stephen's eyes widened. This was unscripted television magic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stephen announced over the rising noise, "Tom Cruise just challenged Clint Eastwood." Tom laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender. But the damage was done. The challenge existed now, recorded and ready for immortality. 4 days later, Tom was midway through a brutal workout when his phone buzzed. His publicist, Rachel, was calling. "Have you seen the response?" she asked, skipping pleasantries. "To what?" "Clint Eastwood responded to your challenge." Tom's stomach tightened. "What did he say?" "Not much. Just, some lessons require personal delivery. It's everywhere." Tom. Every outlet is running with it. Tom walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the perfect Los Angeles skyline. It was just talk show banter. "Rachel." "Well," Marcus Chen called. "He's organizing that major film industry charity event next month in San Francisco. He wants to know if you'd consider a physical exhibition with Clint." "For charity?" Tom's reflection stared back at him. Still fit at 62. Still defying age. The man who performed his own stunts. "Tom, this is where you say, 'Absolutely not,'" Rachel said. But something was stirring in him. That same recklessness that had driven him to hang from moving aircraft. The need to prove something that had defined his entire career. "What if I said yes?" The silence was deafening. "You cannot be serious." But he was. In that moment, Tom Cruise, the man who had spent a lifetime blurring cinema and reality, felt a new challenge crystallizing, not just to entertain, but to prove. "Call Victor Stone," Tom said. "I need to start training." Victor Ironside Stone stood in Tom's home gymnasium 2 days later. At 70, the veteran fight coordinator had worked with everyone from Stallone to Statham. He'd collaborated with Tom for 15 years, choreographing the impossible. "This is different, Tom," Victor said, watching his friend attack the heavy bag. "This isn't choreography. It's not safe. I know what I'm doing," Tom replied, not breaking rhythm. Victor stepped closer. "No, you don't. I've worked with actors and fighters my entire career. They're completely different species. I've trained with the best. Military consultants for Top Gun. Special operations for Mission Impossible." Victor grabbed the bag, stopping Tom's assault. "For movies, Tom. For sequences where everyone knows their marks." His eyes were hard with concern. "Clint Eastwood doesn't follow scripts. He doesn't perform. He exists. You think I can't handle myself? I think you're confusing staged combat with actual confrontation." Victor said, "Look, I'll train you. Someone has to. But understand this, real fighters don't play for cameras. And Clint Eastwood is about as real as they come." Tom turned toward his mirrored wall. The man looking back was Tom Cruise, capable, confident, unconquerable. Not the kid from Syracuse who dreamed of being taken seriously. Not the young actor fighting for respect. Not the middle-aged man who pushed his body to extremes to maintain relevance. Then it's time I got real. 2. Across California. In a modest workshop in Carmel by the sea, Clint Eastwood worked on a piece of furniture. At 94, he moved with the economical grace that had defined his presence both on screen and off. The space around him was quiet, except for the measured sound of sandpaper against wood. His phone vibrated against the workbench. He set down his tools deliberately before answering. "Mr. Eastwood, this is Marcus Chen from the Cinema Heritage Foundation. I'm calling about Tom Cruise's challenge." Clint listened in silence, his weathered face revealing nothing. When the call ended, his longtime associate, Daniel, approached cautiously. "Everything all right?" Clint placed the phone down with careful precision. "Seems Tom Cruise wants to settle something at the charity event next month." Daniel frowned. "You're not seriously considering it?" Clint returned to his woodwork, running his hand along the grain. "Some people learn through words. Others need experience. But he's just an actor playing for publicity." Clint's eyes, sharp despite his years, remained fixed on his work. "Then perhaps this is an opportunity for something beyond publicity." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes lessons need witnesses." As news of the showdown exploded across social media, two men on opposite sides of California began preparing for an encounter neither fully understood. One driven by the need to prove, the other by the wisdom to teach. The sharp crack of leather against Tom's fists echoed through his gymnasium. Sweat poured as he drove another combination into the heavy bag. 4 weeks had passed since he'd accepted the challenge. And with each day, the reality grew heavier. "Again," Victor commanded. "And this time, stop telegraphing. Your right side opens every time." Tom reset, ignoring the burning in his shoulders. The training had intensified beyond any film preparation. No camera resets. No carefully designed sequences. Just relentless, unforgiving work. "You're still thinking cinematically," Victor said, stepping forward. "That dramatic wind-up looks great on screen. In reality, it gets you countered. Tom nodded, frustration building beneath, practiced composure. He was accustomed to mastering challenges through determination and work ethic, but this was different. His body, despite decades of discipline, fought against new patterns. "Let's bring Marcus in," Victor said, gesturing to the young MMA fighter waiting nearby. Tom's stomach tightened. Sparring had become the most humbling part of his days. Marcus was half his age, a rising fighter with lightning reflexes. Each session ended the same way, with Tom on the defensive, his film training inadequate against actual combat. "Remember," Victor said as they touched gloves, "forget everything you learned for cameras. Real fighting is messier, tighter, less visual." The buzzer sounded. Marcus circled with predatory efficiency. Tom maintained his guard, trying to implement weeks of new training against decades of cinematic muscle memory. Marcus feinted, then snapped a jab that caught Tom on the cheek. Not hard enough to injure, but sharp enough to sting his pride. "Counter! Don't retreat!" Victor called. Tom surged forward, throwing a combination that felt powerful. Marcus slipped the first punch, blocked the second, and caught Tom with a clean counter that sent him stumbling. "Stop!" Victor called. "Tom, you're still performing. There is no camera." Tom's frustration boiled over. "I've been doing my own stunts for 40 years. That's the problem," Victor replied evenly. "You've spent decades learning to make fights look real. Clint spent his life being real. Different universe." Tom grabbed a towel, wiping sweat to hide his growing doubt. On film sets, he controlled everything. Each sequence rehearsed to perfection. Here, with no audience but his trainer and a fighter half his age, the illusion crumbled. "We've got 3 more weeks," Victor said, softer now. "But Tom, you need to understand what you're walking into. This isn't a villain you defeat in Act 3. This is Clint Eastwood." Tom stared at his reflection, still fit, still determined, but for the first time in years, uncertain. Across California, in the humble workshop where Clint Eastwood had built furniture and directed films for decades, a different preparation unfolded. The legendary figure moved through his morning routine with practiced precision. Unlike Tom's high-tech facility with specialists and equipment, Clint's preparation consisted of what it always had: disciplined routine and internal focus. "The reporters are outside again," Daniel said from the doorway. Clint completed sanding a table leg before acknowledging his associate. "Tell them what you always do. That Clint Eastwood doesn't train to fight Tom Cruise. He lives his life." Daniel lingered, concern evident. "Are you sure about this exhibition? The media's turning it into a circus." Clint moved to a worn leather chair, sitting with characteristic ease. "Come, sit." Daniel joined him, waiting for the wisdom he knew would come. "Do you know why I accepted this challenge?" Clint asked. "To teach him about respect?" Clint shook his head slowly. "Tom Cruise doesn't need to learn respect. He needs to learn about himself." He glanced toward the door. "For a man who's spent his life in front of cameras, Tom sees very little." "I don't understand." "He's confused the performance of strength with strength itself. The appearance of authenticity with actual authenticity." Clint's eyes focused on the grain of the wood he'd been working. "Perhaps, in his way, he's seeking truth. My job isn't to punish him for that." "Then what is your job?" Clint stood, stretching with fluid control. "To show him the difference between looking strong and being strong." He turned toward his workspace. "Now enough about Tom Cruise. We have real work to do." The contrast in their preparations couldn't have been starker. while Tom surrounded himself with specialists, nutritionists, fighting coaches, physical therapists. Clint simply continued the practices that had defined his life for decades. One man built a training camp. The other maintained a way of life. As media interest intensified, Jennifer Park, the former champion athlete turned commentator, assigned to broadcast the event, found herself increasingly drawn to the philosophical dimensions of the matchup. This isn't just about physical prowess, she told her producer during a pre-event meeting. This is about two different approaches to authenticity. Save the philosophy for the broadcast, her producer replied. The audience wants drama, not analysis. Jennifer shook her head. You're missing what makes this compelling. Cruise has spent decades proving he's authentic by performing his own stunts. Now he's stepping into the ultimate test of that identity. And you think he'll fail? Jennifer considered carefully. I think he'll learn. Whether that feels like failure or enlightenment depends on him. 3 weeks before the event, Tom stood in his bathroom, assessing the damage. Purple bruises bloomed across his ribs where Marcus had landed a particularly sharp kick. His cheekbone throbbed from a jab he hadn't slipped. Victor appeared in the doorway. Concern etched across his face. You're pushing too hard. Not hard enough, Tom replied, wincing as he applied ointment. I'm still not ready, Tom, Victor said carefully. You'll never be ready in the way you're thinking. Not in a few weeks. Tom turned, frustration flashing. So, what are you saying? That I should back out? That I can't do this? Victor stepped forward, placing a hand on Tom's shoulder. I'm saying you need to change your goal. You came into this thinking you could become a fighter in a month. That's not how this works. Then how does it work? You need to understand there's honor in the attempt, in the willingness to step into that space knowing you're outmatched. The victory isn't in beating Clint Eastwood. It's in facing him with dignity. Tom turned back to the mirror, studying his reflection. The face known to billions. The body pushed beyond limits year after year to maintain the illusion of the indomitable hero. What if I can't? He asked quietly. Can't what? Accept being outmatched. I've built my entire career on pushing beyond limits, defying expectations. Then this might be the most important challenge of your life, Victor replied. Just not for the reasons you think. Later that night, unable to sleep, Tom found himself watching old footage of Clint Eastwood. Not the westerns or Dirty Harry films, but behind-the-scenes footage. Interviews. Moments of unguarded authenticity. What struck him wasn't obvious skill or technique, but the calm in Clint's presence. Even in the intensity of directing or acting, there was a centeredness, a reality that transcended performance. On his phone, a news alert appeared. Countdown to Cruise versus Eastwood, the showdown. Tom stared at the screen, the magnitude finally sinking in. He wasn't just facing a man. He was confronting a lifetime of questions about authenticity, about the blurred line between the characters he portrayed and who he truly was. He thought of the moment that started this, that casual boast on a talk show. The easy confidence born of carefully managed challenges. For the first time, he wondered if Victor was right. Perhaps the real test wasn't whether he could match Clint Eastwood, but whether he could face his own limitations with grace. As dawn broke over California, two men prepared for an encounter that had become far more than a publicity stunt. One sought truth through humility, the other through courage. Both paths would converge in 3 weeks before an audience expecting spectacle, but about to witness something far more profound. The Presidio Officers Club in San Francisco had been transformed into an arena of anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables where Hollywood royalty mingled with cinema legends and industry veterans. At the center, a padded exhibition space replaced the usual dance floor, stark and waiting under focused spotlights. Outside, limousines discharged celebrities, while photographers shouted for attention and fans pressed against security barriers. The charity gala had become the most coveted invitation in entertainment, with proceeds benefiting veterans programs and film preservation initiatives. Marcus Chen, resplendent in an impeccable suit, worked the media line with practiced enthusiasm. "This is beyond our expectations," he told an Access Hollywood reporter. "We've raised over $3 million already, and the exhibition hasn't even started." Inside, Jennifer Park adjusted her earpiece, reviewing notes for her commentary position. Unlike the polished hyperbole of her colleagues, her preparation focused on substance beneath spectacle. "Testing. 1 to 2, she said, leaning toward her microphone. Jennifer Park, ready at commentary position. Her producer's voice crackled in her ear. "Tom's arriving at the red carpet now. Clint's car is 5 minutes out. We go live in 30. Jennifer nodded, scanning the rapidly filling room. The energy was unlike anything she'd experienced before, not quite a sporting event, not quite a film premiere, but something hovering between worlds. Just as the night's main attraction blurred lines between performance and reality, Tom Cruise's arrival created the expected surge of flashbulbs and shouted questions. He emerged from his limousine in athletic attire that somehow managed to look both authentic and camera-ready. Professional-grade hand wraps, a fitted performance shirt, emphasizing his famously maintained physique, lightweight training pants. "Tom, over here. Are you nervous?" a reporter called. Tom flashed his trademark smile, waving to fans as Victor guided him through the gauntlet. "Just excited to support such an important cause," he replied, the consummate professional. "Any message for Clint Eastwood?" Tom's smile flickered, a microsecond of vulnerability few would notice. "Just grateful for the opportunity to share this experience with a legend." As he moved toward the entrance, the crowd's attention suddenly shifted. A understated black sedan had pulled up, and from it emerged Clint Eastwood, unpretentious in simple, dark, athletic clothing. His movements unhurried yet precise. Unlike Tom's media engagement, Clint moved through the photographers with minimal acknowledgement, his focus seemingly elsewhere. "Clint, Clint, look this way." The photographers' calls grew more insistent as he passed without playing to their cameras. The contrast was immediate and telling. Tom had arrived as Tom Cruise, the star. Clint arrived as himself, neither amplifying nor diminishing his presence for the occasion. Inside, their paths converged in the preparation area. Tom, surrounded by his team, was reviewing last-minute strategy when Clint entered. Alone. The room fell silent. Tom stepped forward, hand extended. "Clint, thanks for doing this." Clint took his hand with a firm grip, his eyes clear and evaluating. "Tom, just the name. No elaboration. No platitudes." The simplicity created an awkward pause that Tom rushed to fill. "I've been training hard. Hope I can make it interesting for the audience." Clint's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes shifted, perhaps recognition of the chasm between their understandings of what lay ahead. "I'm sure you have," he replied, then moved past toward his preparation space. Victor pulled Tom aside, keeping his voice low. "Remember what we discussed? This isn't about winning." Tom nodded, but his eyes followed Clint, the living legend moving with quiet confidence, unbothered by cameras or expectations. He's not your co-star, Victor added. He's the real thing. Tom's jaw tightened. So am I. From her commentary position, Jennifer watched the room fill with anticipation. Her microphone activated, and she began setting the stage for viewers at home. Good evening and welcome to the Cinema Heritage Foundation Gala, where tonight 2 legends from different eras will meet in an unprecedented exhibition. On paper, this is a friendly demonstration for charity. But make no mistake, what we're about to witness goes deeper than entertainment. The camera tightened on her face. Tom Cruise, the actor famous for performing his own stunts, steps into authentic confrontation against Clint Eastwood, a man whose legend transcends his films. 2 philosophies are about to meet. One speaks loudly. The other moves quietly. One performs strength. The other embodies it. In the preparation areas on opposite sides of the venue, both men made final preparations. Tom was surrounded by his team, Victor checking his raps, a physical therapist warming up his shoulders, Rachel reviewing last-minute publicity points. Remember, this is an exhibition, she said. Keep it controlled, professional. The press will analyze everything. Tom nodded mechanically, but his focus had narrowed to a single point: the noise, the flashing cameras. Even his team's voices had receded behind the pounding of his heartbeat. This moment wasn't about publicity anymore. It had become something personal, a test he hadn't realized he'd been working toward his entire career. Across the venue, Clint sat alone in quiet stillness, eyes closed, breath measured. No team, no last-minute adjustments. Just the centeredness he'd cultivated through decades of work and life. Marcus Chen's voice boomed through the sound system, cutting through conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. It's time for the main event of our evening. The lights dimmed, leaving only the exhibition space illuminated. A dramatic video package played on screens throughout the venue. Highlights of Tom's movie stunts intercut with Clint's iconic film moments and directing achievements. Introducing. First, the announcer called as the video concluded. A Hollywood icon known for pushing the boundaries of action filmmaking. Performing his own stunts across a legendary career, Tom Cruise. Spotlights swept the room, settling on Tom as he moved toward the space, acknowledging applause with raised hands. He looked every inch the action star, confident, camera ready, physically impressive. And his counterpart, the announcer continued as applause subsided. A true pioneer of American cinema. Actor, director, and cultural icon Clint Eastwood. The room erupted again as Clint walked calmly to the space, his expression unchanged by the adulation. Where Tom had played to the crowd, Clint simply acknowledged them with a small nod before taking his position. As both men stood facing each other, the contrast was striking. Tom, despite his years, vibrated with barely contained energy. Clint, 32 years his senior, emanated stillness, his presence more powerful for its restraint. Jennifer's voice provided context for viewers. What you're seeing is more than a generation gap. It's a fundamental difference in approach. Tom Cruise has spent decades proving himself physically on screen. Clint Eastwood proved himself in life long before becoming a screen legend. The moderator called both men to the center, explaining the exhibition parameters. 3 rounds, 2 minutes each. Light to moderate contact only. This is a demonstration, not a competition. Tom nodded eagerly. Clint's expression never changed. Touch hands and return to your positions. The moderator instructed. Their hands met briefly. As they turned away, Clint spoke quietly. Just for Tom's ears, remember why we're here. Tom, already focused on the coming exchange, barely registered the words. In his mind, there was only one reason to prove himself against a legend. To show the world and perhaps himself that his physical prowess was more than camera tricks. The moderator stepped back. The timer buzzed, and as the two men moved toward center, the real test, one neither fully understood, finally began. The first moments unfolded like a physical manifestation of their contrasting philosophies. Tom burst forward with explosive energy, covering distance with the practiced precision of someone who had spent decades making aggression look good on camera. His initial combination jab, cross, hook was technically perfect. Movements honed through thousands of repetitions. Clint, in contrast, barely seemed to move. With subtle shifts of weight and position, he let Tom's attacks pass harmlessly through empty space. Where Tom was all forward momentum and cinematic power, Clint was economy and timing, expending only what was necessary. The crowd, expecting either carefully choreographed exchange or quick humiliation, fell into confused murmurs. This was neither. It was a demonstration of different languages of movement. What we're seeing, Jennifer explained to viewers, is the fundamental difference between fighting for the camera and fighting for effectiveness. Tom's movements are bigger, designed to read visually. Clint's are minimal, focused on result rather than appearance. Tom pressed forward, frustration building as his attacks moves that had looked devastating in films seemed to evaporate before making contact. Clint continued his effortless evasion, occasionally adding slight redirections that left Tom off balance without ever appearing aggressive. Midway through the first round, Tom finally connected a glancing blow to Clint's shoulder as the older man shifted. The contact, minor as it was, sent a surge of confidence through Tom. He pressed harder, his combinations becoming more elaborate, more determined. Clint's expression never changed, but something shifted in his approach. Rather than simply evading, he began adding subtle counters. A light tap to the ribs here, a gentle redirection there. Nothing showy, nothing aggressive, but each touch a message. I could do more if I chose to. From the sidelines, Victor watched with growing concern. He recognized what the crowd didn't, that Clint was holding back enormously, treating this less as confrontation and more as education. As the first round neared its end, Tom launched into his most ambitious combination, yet a spinning technique straight from one of his action films. Clint, seeing the telegraphed movement, simply stepped inside the spin and placed a perfectly timed open palm against Tom's chest. The light contact was enough. Tom's momentum combined with the precisely placed counter sent him stumbling backward, fighting for balance. He didn't fall, but the message was clear to everyone watching. Clint was in complete control. The buzzer sounded. Round 1 was over. Tom returned to his corner, breathing hard, more from frustration than exertion. I can't touch him, he muttered to Victor. You're fighting a movie fight against reality, Victor replied, offering water. Notice how he never moves more than he needs to. No wasted energy. No showmanship. So what do I do? Victor's eyes were serious. Stop performing. Start listening to what he's teaching you. Across the space, Clint sat calmly, declining water or coaching. His breathing was unchanged, his focus internal rather than on his opponent or the crowd. Round 2 of this exhibition. The announcer called, beginning now. Tom approached more cautiously this time, his initial confidence tempered by the first round's lesson. He circled, measuring distance, trying to read Clint's intentions in his positioning. Clint, for the first time, took initiative. He moved forward with such subtle efficiency that Tom found himself retreating before fully registering the advance. A compact combination so economical it was almost invisible to untrained observers tapped Tom's defenses. Not punishing, but probing, testing. Tom countered instinctively, falling back on decades of training for the screen. His movements remained bigger than necessary, optimized for visual impact rather than efficiency. Clint slipped inside his guard again, this time placing a controlled strike to Tom's ribs. Just enough pressure to register. Feel the difference? Clint asked quietly as they clinched briefly. Tom's competitive instinct flared. He broke the clinch aggressively, launching another combination. This time, however, Clint didn't simply evade. He countered with precision, a quick strike to the body that landed with enough impact to draw a sharp intake of breath from Tom. The crowd sensed the shift. What had begun as demonstration was becoming something more authentic. Not brutal, but genuine. The artificial container of exhibition was giving way to truer exchange. Jennifer's commentary captured the transformation. What we're witnessing now is no longer just charity exhibition. It's becoming genuine dialogue between two physical philosophies, Hollywood precision versus authentic presence. Tom, feeling the sting in his ribs, recalibrated. Victor's advice echoed in his mind. Stop performing. For perhaps the first time in decades, Tom Cruise, the actor who had built a career on spectacular physical performance, tried to simply be present in his body without consideration for how it looked. The change was subtle but immediate. His movements became more compact. His focus narrowed to the exchange rather than the impression it created. Clint, sensing the shift, nodded almost imperceptibly. They engaged again. And this time, something different emerged. Not equality. Clint's mastery remained evident, but authenticity on both sides. Tom landed a clean jab, earning a look of acknowledgement from Clint. The older man responded with a controlled combination that backed Tom toward the edge of the space. The second round ended with both men engaged in more genuine exchange than anyone had expected. As they returned to their corners, new energy permeated the room. What had begun as spectacle was evolving into something unexpected, a real moment of transmission between generations and traditions. "He's not fighting me," Tom said to Victor as he sat. "He's teaching me. That's what real masters do," Victor replied. "The question is, are you ready to learn?" Tom's eyes found Clint across the space. The legend sat in perfect stillness, conserving energy, maintaining focus. No team fussing over him. No adjustments to make. Just presence. Final round. The announcer called. Round 3 of this exhibition. As they met at center for the last time, Clint spoke again, his voice low enough that only Tom could hear. "Control starts when you stop trying to win." Tom might have dismissed the words an hour earlier. Now, with his ribs aching and his Hollywood certainty shaken, he found himself genuinely listening not just to the words, but to what Clint's presence had been telling him throughout their exchange. The final round began not with explosive movement, but with mutual assessment. Tom had abandoned his need to dominate visually. Clint maintained his efficient minimalism. They circled, engaged, separated a conversation without words. Then Tom attempted something new. Not a movie technique, but genuine approach. His movement was tighter, his intention clearer. Clint acknowledged the change with the faintest smile, then responded in kind. The exchange that followed was the most authentic of the exhibition. Tom connected with a clean combination that demonstrated real understanding. The crowd, sensing the moment's legitimacy, fell into appreciative silence. Clint's response was measured but definitive. He slipped Tom's next attack and countered with a perfectly timed strike to the ribs, the same spot he'd targeted earlier. The impact, while controlled, carried enough force to register deeply. Tom felt something give. Not a break, but a warning. A clear message from body to mind that a line had been crossed. He gasped, instinctively covering the area. Clint stepped back, giving him space. Their eyes met. And in that moment, something passed between them. Beyond the physical exchange, a recognition on Tom's part. An acknowledgement on Clint's. The buzzer sounded. The exhibition was over. The crowd, uncertain how to respond to what they'd witnessed, began applauding tentatively. It built gradually as both men touched hands one final time. Clint leaned in close. "Now you understand," he said quietly. Tom, one arm still protecting his injured ribs, found himself nodding. He did understand, though he couldn't yet articulate what exactly had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in how he perceived himself, his career, and the man standing before him. As the announcer declared the exhibition complete and thanked both participants, Tom and Clint stood side by side. No victor was announced. This hadn't been a competition in any traditional sense. Yet everyone present recognized that something significant had transpired. Jennifer's closing commentary captured what many felt. What we just witnessed wasn't about who won or lost. It was about authenticity versus appearance, about the difference between performing strength and embodying it. Tom Cruise came looking for validation and found something more valuable, a lesson in humility and genuine mastery. As they left the space, Tom moved gingerly. The pain in his ribs, a physical reminder of the evening's deeper impact. Clint walked beside him briefly, then paused to place a hand on Tom's shoulder. "Ice those ribs," he said. "And remember, real strength doesn't need an audience." With that, he moved away, leaving Tom to absorb not just the physical consequences of their encounter, but the philosophical ones as well. The noise of the gala continued around them. But for Tom, everything had narrowed to the sharp pain radiating from his ribs and the unsettling clarity that had come with it. Medical staff guided him to a private room off the main venue where a doctor waited to assess the damage. The space was quiet compared to the buzz, outside a stark island in a sea of celebration and confusion. "I need to go back out there," Tom insisted, wincing as the doctor's fingers probed his side. Even through his compression shirt, the tenderness was unmistakable. "You have at least one cracked rib, possibly two," the doctor replied, her expression professional but concerned. "You need rest, ice, and x-rays. This isn't something to walk off. Mr. Cruise." Tom shook his head, a gesture that sent another lance of pain through his torso. "Just wrap it. I can't disappear now." Despite the pain, something deeper drove him a need to complete whatever transformation had begun in that space. To face not just Clint Eastwood, but the expectations of the crowd, the media, and most importantly, himself. Victor stood nearby, concern etched across his weathered face. His eyes, which had witnessed decades of Hollywood bravado, now held something Tom rarely saw, directed at him. Genuine worry. "Tom, nobody expects you to go back out there. The exhibition's over." "It's not over for me," Tom said, grimacing as the doctor applied a temporary compression wrap around his torso. Each winding brought both relief and restriction, a physical manifestation of the evening's lesson. "Help me up." Victor exchanged glances with the doctor, who shrugged helplessly. She'd worked with enough celebrities to recognize the futility of arguing with determination like his. 10 minutes maximum. The doctor conceded, taping the end of the wrap. "Then you're going to the hospital for proper imaging. And no handshakes. No embraces. Minimal movement." "That's not a suggestion." "Mr. Cruz." Tom nodded, accepting Victor's hand as he stood carefully. The movement sent waves of pain cascading through his side, different from anything he'd experienced on set. Movie injuries happened in controlled environments with medics standing by, with the comforting knowledge that cut would eventually be called. This pain carried no such assurances. It simply was raw, persistent, unperformative. "What are you thinking?" Victor asked as they moved slowly toward the door, his hand hovering near Tom's elbow, ready to steady him. Tom paused, one hand braced against the wall. The corridor was empty but for a security guard at the far end, offering a rare moment of genuine privacy. In the silence, Tom found himself confronting questions he'd spent a career avoiding. "I'm thinking I've spent my whole life trying to convince everyone, maybe even myself, that I could do anything. Be anything." He took a careful breath, feeling the restriction of the bandage against his expanding lungs. "Now I need to show I can also lose with dignity." Victor's expression softened. "That's a different kind of strength, Tom. Maybe the only kind that matters right now." Outside in the main venue, a curious energy had taken hold. The exhibition had defied easy categorization. It wasn't the flashy performance many had expected, nor was it the one-sided humiliation some had secretly anticipated. What had unfolded was something more subtle, and for many, more profound, a visible transmission of wisdom through physical dialogue. Jennifer's voice carried over the sound system as she summarized for viewers at home. "What we witnessed tonight wasn't just a physical exchange between two legends from different worlds. It was a visible representation of two philosophies, one built on appearance, the other on essence." Her words hung in the air as Tom and Victor approached the entrance to the main venue. The cacophony of voices, the pop of champagne corks, the soft jazz playing underneath it, all seemed disconnected from the simple truth Tom now carried in his injured body. "Ready?" Victor asked, hand on the door. Tom straightened as much as his ribs would allow, finding the posture that minimized pain. "Actually, wait." He reached up to adjust his hair, a habitual gesture before facing cameras, then stopped mid-motion, struck by the absurdity of it. After a moment's consideration, he deliberately mussed his perfect styling, creating a vulnerability in his appearance that matched his physical state. "Now I'm ready." As they emerged, a path cleared through the crowd like water parting. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. Cameras turned. Phones raised a wall of lenses capturing every careful step, every guarded movement. Tom's progress was visibly measured, one arm held protectively against his side, his trademark fluid motion replaced by something more tentative. Yet there was something in his expression, a clarity that hadn't been there before, that caught everyone's attention. The perfect Tom Cruise smile, practiced over thousands of red carpets, was absent. In its place was something more honest. Pain, certainly, but also a kind of peace. Whispers followed in his wake. Did Eastwood really hurt him? Are those broken ribs? Is he coming back for more? Rachel, his publicist, materialized at his side, her professional calm barely masking panic. "Tom, we need to get ahead of this. I've got statements prepared." "Not now." "Rachel," Tom said quietly, But the narrative, let it be what it is. Her eyes widened at the unfamiliar response, but she stepped back, watching as her most controlled client moved through the crowd with newfound authenticity. Across the room, Clint Eastwood stood in quiet conversation with several veteran filmmakers and industry legends. Unlike the breathless exclamations elsewhere, their discussion was measured masters, analyzing craft rather than spectators consuming entertainment. Clint looked unchanged by the exhibition, neither tired nor energized, simply present. His posture remained perfect, his movements economical, even in casual conversation. When he noticed Tom approaching, he gently excused himself and turned to meet him. The contrast between them was starker now than during the exhibition. Tom's careful movement against Clint's effortless poise. Tom's evident pain against Clint's serene composure. They faced each other once more. This time without wraps or moderator. Without the artificial container of an exhibition. Just two men, one humbled, one ever-centered, one injured in body but awakening in spirit. The other, the living embodiment of hard-earned wisdom. The crowd around them fell silent, creating a bubble of anticipation. Phones recorded. Cameras flashed. But for once, Tom wasn't performing for them. His attention was wholly fixed on the man before him. "I owe you an apology," Tom said, his voice quiet but steady, though pitched for Clint's ears alone. The silence in their immediate vicinity carried his words further than intended. Clint's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held compassion. For what? For thinking this was about proving something. For making it about ego. Around them, the nearest observers exchanged glances. This wasn't the expected narrative, the movie star conceding to the legend. Tom Cruise, acknowledging limitation. It contradicted the carefully constructed mythology that surrounded him. The faintest smile touched Clint's lips. Most confrontations are about ego until they become about truth. Tom nodded, wincing slightly at the movement. Even this small gesture sent fresh pain through his side, a physical reminder of the lesson he'd received. The truth is, I've spent my career blurring the line between illusion and reality. Tonight, you showed me the difference. Something shifted in Clint's gaze recognition. Perhaps that Tom was grasping something genuine from their encounter. He studied Tom for a moment, seeing beyond the celebrity to the man beneath a man whose identity had been built on extraordinary physical capability, now facing its limits. There's no shame in limitations, Tom, only in pretending they don't exist. The words landed with the same precision Clint had shown in the exhibition, directly to the core. Tom felt their impact, not as challenge but as liberation. For decades, his entire persona had been crafted around transcending normal human constraints, pushing beyond what others thought possible. The admission of limitation should have felt like failure. Instead, it felt strangely like freedom. Around them, the crowd maintained a respectful distance, but phones recorded every moment. Cameras captured every exchange. Marcus Chen hovered nearby, sensing a viral moment in the making. But even he remained silent, understanding that something authentic was transpiring. "I'd like to propose something," Tom said, straightening despite the pain in his side. The motion cost him a sharp intake of breath, betrayed the effort it required, but he maintained his posture, finding dignity in the struggle rather than denying it. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Clint's expression didn't change, but a question formed in his eyes. "Not to do this again," Tom clarified, seeing the subtle shift, "but to learn from you, not for cameras or publicity, just to learn." For the first time that evening, genuine surprise registered on Clint's face. quickly replaced by thoughtful consideration. His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing Tom's sincerity. He hadn't expected this, not from Tom Cruise, the ultimate Hollywood action hero. Not from the man whose career had been built on spectacular physical performance rather than quiet mastery. Learning isn't about acquiring techniques, Clint said finally, his voice carrying the weight of decades of earned wisdom. It's about unlearning illusion. The crowd around them had grown, drawn by the unexpected exchange. Among them, Jennifer stood with her microphone lowered, choosing to observe rather than narrate. She recognized what was unfolding, not just a conversation between celebrities, but a moment of genuine transmission across generations and traditions. "I think," Tom replied with a tentative smile, "I've had a good first lesson in that tonight." He gestured slightly toward his injured ribs, then grimaced at the movement. Clint considered the proposal, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Then, with deliberate intention, he extended his hand. "Then we have somewhere to start." Their handshake was captured by dozens of cameras. But neither man played to the audience. Something had shifted for Tom, a recognition that authentic strength came not from proving oneself, but from acknowledging truth. For Clint, a recognition of genuine humility emerging from an unexpected place. The moment was broken by Victor stepping forward, protective instinct overriding the significance of the exchange. "I hate to interrupt, but he needs to get to a hospital. Doctor's orders." Clint nodded, releasing Tom's hand. "Take care of those ribs. Healing is part of the discipline." 2. As Tom turned to leave, escorted by Victor and the medical team that had materialized at his side, the crowd parted once more. Phones flashed. Questions were called out by reporters who sensed a story evolving beyond the expected narrative. But Tom moved through it all with a new quality, not the practiced charm of a movie star, but the quiet dignity of someone who had faced a truth about himself and emerged changed. In the limousine headed toward California Pacific Medical Center, Tom leaned carefully against the leather seat, eyes closed against waves of pain. The vehicle's gentle motion, usually unnoticeable, sent fresh reminders with every turn and bump. "I've broken bones before," he said to Victor, who sat watchfully opposite. "On set. During stunts. This feels different, because it is different," Victor observed. Studying his friend and client of 15 years, Tom opened his eyes, looking out at the passing lights of San Francisco, the city where innovation and tradition danced together endlessly. Studios where fantasy was manufactured with meticulous care. Billboards where his own face had loomed larger than life, promising the impossible made visible. "It is different," Tom said. "Before, every injury was in service of creating something that looked real. This," he gestured toward his ribs. "The movement cautious now, respectful of his body's protest. This is just real." Victor studied his friend, seeing changes that went beyond the physical. In 15 years of collaboration, he'd watched Tom push himself to extraordinary lengths, always in service of spectacle, always with one eye on how it would play on screen. This was something new, pain without performance, consequence without cameras. "What will you tell the press?" Victor asked. "They'll be waiting at the hospital. They'll want the story." Tom was quiet for a long moment, considering his entire career had been built on controlling narratives, managing perceptions, blurring the line between Tom Cruise the man and Tom Cruise the phenomenon. What happened tonight threatened that carefully maintained illusion, not just the injury, but the visible lesson in humility. Outside, The San Francisco night slid by, a city built on dreams and reinvention, on the gap between aspiration and reality. For decades, Tom had been one of its most successful navigators, a master at controlling how the world saw him. Tonight, that control had been gently but firmly taken from his hands. "I'll tell them the truth," he said finally, finding unexpected comfort in the simplicity of that approach. "That I went looking for validation and found education instead." He smiled faintly, the expression more genuine for its imperfection. "That real strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise after you've been knocked down." Victor nodded, seeing something new emerging in his friend. Not the calculated vulnerability that sometimes featured in interviews, but authentic recognition of limitation. That's going to change some narratives. Maybe they need changing. As the limousine pulled up to the hospital entrance, where indeed reporters had already gathered, Tom Cruise prepared to face a different kind of spotlight, one that illuminated not just his undimmed courage, but his newly discovered humility. In that moment, with his ribs throbbing and his perspective forever altered, Tom understood what Clint had been trying to teach him from the beginning. True mastery begins not with domination of others, but with honest recognition of oneself, not with exceeding limitations, but with acknowledging them, not with performance, but with truth. And that, perhaps, was the most challenging role of all. 4 weeks after the now famous exhibition, an unassuming SUV pulled up to a modest workshop in Carmel by the sea, where Clint Eastwood had worked on various projects for decades. The morning sun cast long shadows across the coastal landscape, illuminating a building that stood in stark contrast to the gleaming production facilities and trendy fitness centers that dominated Hollywood's wellness landscape. The workshop, housed in a converted barn with simple signage and weathered wood siding, embodied the same understated authenticity as its owner. The driver's side door opened, and Tom Cruise emerged, moving with the careful deliberation of someone still healing from injury. Each movement was measured, respectful of the body's ongoing repair. The bruising along his ribs had faded from angry purple to yellowing green, but the deeper lesson those injuries had taught remained vivid and clear. He wore no designer clothes, no watch worth more than a car, just simple, casual attire and an expression of quiet determination. For perhaps the first time in decades, he had made no concession to public appearance. No carefully selected casual but premium look that paradoxically drew more attention. This morning, Tom Cruise was dressed not for cameras, but for practicality. The media frenzy that had followed the showdown, as it had been dubbed online, had mostly subsided, though footage of their exchange had been viewed hundreds of millions of times. What had begun as a publicity stunt had become something culturally significant, a visible parable about authenticity versus performance that resonated far beyond entertainment circles. Entertainment shows had run the footage on loop for days. Social media had exploded with analysis, memes, and unexpected philosophical discussions about performative strength versus authentic mastery. Sports commentators and cultural critics alike had found meaning in the exchange that transcended its physical dimensions. Tom paused outside the workshop entrance, taking a deep breath. His ribs still ached when he moved too quickly, a physical reminder of the lesson he'd received. The X-rays had confirmed 2 cracked ribs, not severe enough to require anything beyond time and care, but significant enough to ensure he wouldn't soon forget. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, leaving behind the gentle sounds of coastal California for the quiet intensity of focused work. The transition was jarring from a world where his presence invariably created disruption to one where his celebrity held no currency. Inside, The workshop was nothing like the high-tech training facilities Tom was accustomed to. No mirrors lined the walls. No specialized equipment filled the space. Just workbenches, tools, partially completed furniture pieces, and the smell of wood and varnish. The absence of mirrors was particularly striking. There was no way to watch oneself perform. No opportunity to adjust based on appearance rather than effectiveness. Clint stood at a workbench, carefully planing a piece of wood. His focus was absolute, his movements economical and precise. When Tom entered, he completed his stroke before acknowledging his visitor with a small nod. "You came," Clint said simply, neither surprised nor particularly impressed. "I said I would," Tom replied, glancing around the workshop, taking in its understated functionality. No complex equipment, no technological aids, nothing to distract from the essential work. Different from what I'm used to. That's the point. Clint gestured for Tom to follow him to a small office at the back of the space. Inside, the walls were adorned, not with Academy Awards or celebrity photos, but with simple artwork principles rather than accolades. "The work is the reward," read one. "Build more than you break," stated another. They sat across from each other at a modest desk. Clint studied Tom with the same penetrating gaze he'd shown the night of their exhibition, seeing beyond the celebrity to the man within. His assessment was neither critical nor approving, simply observant, present, aware. "How are the ribs?" he asked, his gaze dropping briefly to where Tom's hand unconsciously rested against his side. "Healing," Tom replied. "The doctor says I should be careful for another 6 weeks. No intense activity." Clint nodded. "Pain is a teacher. Sometimes the most important one." "I've been thinking about what happened," Tom said, meeting Clint's gaze directly. The statement was offered without performance, without the practiced vulnerability he might have shown in an interview, just simple truth. "And what was that?" Clint's question held genuine curiosity beneath its simplicity. Tom considered his words carefully. For a man who had spent decades with teams of publicists crafting every public utterance, speaking without calculation felt both foreign and strangely liberating. "All my life, I've pushed against limits. Defied expectations. Done the impossible stunt. The dangerous sequence. The thing everyone said couldn't be done." Clint listened without comment, his weathered face impassive. "I thought that was strength," Tom continued. "But what you showed me was different. It wasn't about what you could do. It was about," he paused, searching for the right words, "about being centered in who you are. Not proving anything to anyone." A faint smile crossed Clint's weathered face, the first real expression Tom had seen from him. "That's a good place to start. I'd like to learn more," Tom said. "Not for a role. Not for the cameras. For myself?" Clint considered the request, his expression thoughtful. The proposition wasn't simple. Tom Cruise was not just a potential student, but a global celebrity whose presence would inevitably affect the workshop's atmosphere. Moreover, Hollywood's relationship with authenticity had historically been superficial, focused on spectacle rather than substance, on appearance rather than essence. "Working here isn't about techniques or skills," Clint said finally. "It's about discipline, awareness, and craftsmanship. Building something real. Building." The concept seemed to catch Tom by surprise. Clint gestured toward the main workshop space, visible through the office window. Various projects in different stages of completion lined the workbenches. A table being restored, a chair being crafted from scratch. Simple, functional objects made with care, This is where I come to remember what's real, Clint said. Creating something with your hands. Something that serves a purpose beyond appearance. It's not about impressing anyone. It's about honest work. Tom watched as sunlight filtered through the windows, casting patterns across the workspace. There was something profoundly moving in its simplicity. Its lack of pretense. I can't promise I'll be a good student, Tom said finally. Turning back to Clint, I've spent decades learning a different way of being. My instincts know performance, not presence. That's why you need to start as a beginner, Clint replied. His tone, matter of fact, without the burden of being Tom Cruise. The proposition was both simple and radical. To step away from the identity he'd spent a lifetime building. To accept limitation and learn something new without the safety net of celebrity. It challenged not just his approach, but his fundamental sense of self. For a moment, doubt flickered across Tom's face. His entire adult life had been built around exceptional capability, around the narrative of someone who could master anything through sheer will and work ethic. To begin again as a novice, especially in something where his age and injuries placed natural constraints on progress, it contradicted everything that defined him publicly. But something had shifted that night in San Francisco. The certainties that had driven him for decades had been gently but irrevocably disrupted. What remained was a question he hadn't allowed himself to ask. Who was Tom Cruise when stripped of exceptional achievement? When the cameras were gone and the spectacular feats impossible? When can I start? Tom asked. The question carrying more weight than its simplicity suggested. Clint rose from his chair with that same fluid grace that had so impressed Tom during their exhibition. You already have. Over the following months, a remarkable transformation unfolded, not in front of cameras, but in the quiet confines of Clint's workshop, 3 mornings a week. Tom Cruise arrived alone, parked his unassuming vehicle, and worked alongside the master craftsman. No entourage, no special treatment, just another student learning the fundamentals. The first sessions were humbling in ways Tom hadn't anticipated. His hands, trained for decades to move in ways that photographed well, resisted the more efficient, less visual techniques Clint taught. Tasks that should have been simple became awkward challenges. Skills that appeared elementary revealed fundamental weaknesses in his foundation. You're still performing, Clint observed during their 3rd session, watching Tom struggle with a basic planing technique. You're thinking about how it looks rather than how it functions. Tom nodded, frustration evident despite his determination. Hard to break the habit of a lifetime. That's why we start with the simplest things, Clint replied. Standing correctly, breathing fully, working honestly. The mental adjustment proved even more difficult than the physical. Tom had built a career on controlling outcomes, on perfectionism, on mastering challenges through sheer force of will and work ethic. Clint's approach required the opposite, surrendering control, accepting limitation, finding strength in yielding rather than forcing. Your mind is still trying to win, Clint told him one morning after Tom had pushed himself too hard and aggravated his healing ribs. There is no winning here, only understanding. Gradually, something shifted. The change was subtle at first, moments of genuine presence replacing performance. Flashes of understanding piercing through the habitual need to excel. Tom began to grasp that the workshop offered something he'd never found on set, the opportunity to be present without pressure, to learn without expectations, to create something real without consideration for how it would be perceived. Jennifer Park, whose commentary on the night of the exhibition had earned widespread praise for its insight, was one of the few journalists permitted to observe a working session 3 months into Tom's new practice. Her presence was allowed only after Tom himself requested it, recognizing that the story of his journey might have value beyond his personal transformation. What strikes me most, she wrote in her subsequent article, is not the physical transformation, but the philosophical one taking place. Tom Cruise, perhaps the most visually kinetic actor of his generation, is learning to be still, to find power in restraint rather than explosion, to value what works over what looks impressive. The piece, published in The Hollywood Reporter, captured something that resonated far beyond entertainment circles. A parable about authenticity in an age of performance, about substance beneath style. It presented Tom not as a celebrity dabbling in craftsmanship, but as a genuine student undergoing fundamental change. The humility required to begin again as a beginner, especially for someone defined by exceptional mastery, shouldn't be underestimated. Jennifer wrote, "There is a courage in Tom's journey that has nothing to do with physical risk and everything to do with identity risk." For Tom himself, the journey became increasingly personal. Away from the workshop, his career continued. Scripts were read, productions planned, but something fundamental had shifted in his approach. In meetings with directors, he asked different questions. Rather than focusing on how to make action sequences more spectacular, he found himself concerned with making them more authentic. It's not about bigger explosions or higher falls anymore, he told a filmmaker during pre-production for his next project. It's about finding the truth in the movement, the necessity rather than the spectacle. The director had looked at him quizzically. "Since when do you care about subtle?" Tom had smiled. "Since I learned that real power doesn't need to announce itself." Victor noticed the change during pre-production meetings. "You're different," he observed as they reviewed stunt concepts. "More grounded." Tom smiled. Clint would say, "I'm finally learning to stand properly." The real test came 6 months after the exhibition. When Clint invited Tom to assist with a community woodworking class, he taught not as a celebrity guest, but as a senior student helping newcomers. The participants, many seeking creative outlets or recovering from various life challenges, didn't care about Tom Cruise, the movie star. They cared only about whether his guidance helped them learn the craft. "I was skeptical when he first showed up," Daniel admitted to a documentary filmmaker who was recording Clint's community work. "I thought it was a publicity stunt or research for a role. But he's put in the work day after day. No cameras. No fanfare. Just learning like everyone else." The filmmaker, capturing footage for a documentary about creativity and aging, asked if they could interview Tom about his experience. The request went through proper channels agents. Publicists, the machinery that managed access to one of Hollywood's biggest stars. The answer came back as a surprise to everyone involved. Tom would participate, but only as one student among many. No special focus. No featured segment. Just another voice in the workshop's community. On the day of the interview, Tom arrived early, helping set up the workspace for the regular morning session before the film crew arrived. When the cameras began rolling, he participated in the class like any other student, following Clint's instructions, helping newer members when asked, focusing on his own work when not. During his brief interview, seated at a workbench like all the others, Tom spoke with a clarity and authenticity that struck everyone present. What happened that night with Clint wasn't just about physical confrontation, he explained, his expression thoughtful rather than camera-ready. It was about recognizing the difference between appearing strong and being strong, between performing authenticity and embodying it. The interviewer, clearly expecting the polished charisma Tom Cruise was known for, seemed momentarily disoriented by his unvarnished sincerity. "Do you regret the exhibition? Given the physical and public consequences?" Tom shook his head. "Some lessons you can only learn through experience. Clint could have told me what he needed to tell me, but I wouldn't have heard it. I needed to feel it literally and figuratively." "And what was that lesson?" the interviewer pressed. Tom glanced across the workshop to where Clint was quietly correcting a student's technique. His movements economical, his presence centered, his focus absolute. That real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need witnesses or validation. It simply is. The documentary, when released later that year, presented Tom's story as just one thread in a larger tapestry of transformation through discipline and craft. Critics and viewers alike noted that the most striking aspect wasn't the celebrity element, but how organically Tom's journey fit alongside those of the other students, people seeking purpose, meaning, and connection through honest work. For the wider public, the whole episode, from the initial challenge to the unexpected outcome to Tom's continued learning, became something of a cultural touchstone. Memes and clips circulated endlessly, but beneath the viral surface, a genuine conversation had begun about authenticity versus image, about substance versus spectacle in an increasingly performative society. 1 year to the day after the showdown, Tom arrived at the workshop to find Clint waiting alone in the empty space. The morning light filtered through high windows, creating pools of brightness on the worn floorboards. The air held the quietude of a space dedicated to presence rather than distraction. "No class today?" Tom asked, setting down his bag. Clint shook his head. "I thought we might talk. It's been a year." They sat together at a central workbench. Two men whose lives and legacies had become unexpectedly intertwined. Clint, at 95, moved with the same fluid control that had made him a legend. Tom, though still powerfully built, had developed a different quality of movement, less performative, more centered. "I've been thinking about what to say today," Clint began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of earned wisdom. "About how to mark this anniversary." Tom waited, having learned the value of patient silence. "A year ago, you came looking for validation," Clint continued, "to prove something to the world. Perhaps to yourself?" Tom nodded. "And you showed me how little I understood about real strength. Not just strength," Clint corrected gently. "Understanding. The greatest people I've known weren't those who could achieve anything. They were those who understood there was always more to learn. Always another level of awareness to achieve." He rose to his feet with characteristic grace, indicating for Tom to join him. Standing face to face in the empty workshop, the contrast between them remained, but it had evolved from opposition to complementarity. Both men embodied discipline, but in different forms. Both demonstrated mastery, but of different kinds. "Show me the first piece I taught you to make," Clint instructed. Tom moved to a workbench, selecting tools with deliberate care. He began working on a simple joint, not with the flashy precision of someone performing carpentry, but with the authentic focus of a dedicated student. His movements were clean, efficient, rooted. The transformation from a year before was evident not in spectacular capability, but in honest presence. When he finished, Clint nodded once. "A year ago, you came here thinking you knew what strength was. What do you think now?" Tom considered the question carefully, giving it the respect it deserved. "I think I've spent my life performing power. You've spent yours embodying it. And the difference is, performance needs an audience. Embodiment is for yourself." Clint smiled, a rare, full expression that transformed his weathered face. There's hope for you yet. Outside the workshop, California continued its eternal dance of illusion and reality. Studios produced fantasies. Celebrities maintained personas. The machinery of entertainment transformed life into spectacle. But within these walls, something different had taken root. A recognition that beneath the noise and flash of modern life, deeper truths waited for those with the courage to face them. As they prepared for the day's first students, who were beginning to arrive, Tom realized that the most valuable thing he had gained wasn't new skills or physical discipline. It was perspective, the ability to see himself clearly, to recognize the difference between the image he had projected and the man he truly was. Clint, reading his thoughts as he often seemed to do, placed a hand briefly on Tom's shoulder. "The strongest opponents we face are not others," he said quietly. "They are our own illusions about ourselves." Tom nodded, understanding now what he couldn't have grasped a year before. The exhibition hadn't been a defeat. It had been an invitation to step beyond performance into authenticity, beyond appearance into essence. As the workshop filled with students of varying ages and backgrounds, Tom took his place among them, not at the front as a celebrity, nor at the back as an observer, but simply as one learner among many, seeking not to prove, but to understand, not to conquer, but to learn. And in that simple positioning present, attentive, humble, lay the most profound lesson Clint Eastwood had taught him, that true mastery begins when the need to master others ends. The morning class began with a moment of quiet acknowledgement, not of hierarchy, but of mutual respect for the work ahead. As Tom straightened from the gesture, he caught Clint's eye across the room and saw in the old master's gaze both approval and challenge. The journey wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be. But for the man who had spent a lifetime pushing beyond boundaries, the most liberating discovery had been learning to accept them not as limitations to overcome, but as truths to embrace. His ribs had healed long ago, but the lesson remained, embodied in every breath, every movement, every moment of clarity. Real strength isn't proven. It simply is.